lost private. We're in Normandy.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 18 of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. My name is Joe Muccia, and I'm here with my buddy, Edwin Popken. Edwin is a tour guide par excellence. He works alongside the World War II Museum and does touring in his home country of the Netherlands all the way through till the end of the campaign when he does his Easy Company tours with them. He's about as knowledgeable about World War II, especially about actions and operations in his home country as anyone I've met. You've probably seen him on Woody's World War II TV, and it's a great honor to have you on here, buddy.
It's a great honor to be in the podcast, man. And man, did you just put the bar very high for me?
If I put it at a place where I know you'll exceed it, don't worry. So we're going to talk about Black Friday, and for everyone, if you're not familiar with Black Friday, Edwin will fill you in on the origins of that when we get into it. But really, Black Friday, unlike Al Murray's Black Tuesday book that just came out, Black Friday occurs on the 22nd of September, 1944. And those of you who have followed the podcast, I just did an episode review of episode 4 of Band of Brothers for the replacements. And we talked about the initial actions of Easy Company and the 506 during the open moments of the campaign. And obviously, the parachute jump goes on the 17th. The bridge is blown in the face of the 506 as they move south towards Eindhoven. They pivot quickly along with their attached engineers and set up a kind of a makeshift bridge and get the bulk of the regiment moved across the Wilhelmina Canal into the northern approaches of Eindhoven and kind of lay up there for the evening. And then the next day they begin moving in, and the 30th Corps shows up, and they're able to put in a Bailey Bridge and start moving more heavier forces into the up towards Son and out past it. But a lot of the photos you'll see, over the last week or so of the celebrations in 1944 typically come from Eindhoven. Lots of pictures taken. It's really a great thing to see all these folks out there showering flowers and beers and milk and apples on their liberators. But by the 18th, the forces that come into Eindhoven, it's mostly the 506 on the 101st Airborne side, but there are also elements of the 327th that are in there too. Is it correct, Edwin? If my memory's not too shot? No,
it's technically just a 506.
506
ordered there.
And Sink knows that he's got
327 does not come in until the 18th, and part of it on the 19th, and they stay more around Zon. Technically, initially they are in divisional reserve.
Right. So the 506, Sink knows he can't keep his forces bottled up in Eindhoven. He has to push them out, creating kind of a screen around the city, because he's getting reports from the Dutch resistance that there's going to be counterattacks coming on the part of the Germans. So he pushes out parts of 1st Battalion. Again, memory's not too shot, to the west of the city, and to the east of the city, he starts pushing out elements of the 2nd Battalion. The 3rd Battalion had led the charge into the city on the 18th and got held up by a couple of 88s. And then he pivoted the other battalions around it. But he's now pushing them out, and then we get that now famous sequence in Band of Brothers where they go out to Neuenen and they're repulsed. But really what happens is they go out on the 19th first to push out, and they run into reconnaissance elements of the Panzer Brigade 107, and they quickly pull back. And the next day they make the incursion into Neuenen on the 20th. And then they again pull back. After that, the 21st is a kind of if I remember the 506 AAR properly, they're kind of consolidating around the city and then starting to push up towards north past Son, and that's where it kind of sets the stage for what's going on the 22nd. Do you want to talk about Black Friday now, especially the origins of the nickname for the day?
Yeah, so when we talk about Black Friday, it's actually a phrase that is credited to General Horrocks, the British commander commanding British 30 Corps, and that's of course the Army Corps that comes through Eindhoven on their way to Nijmegen, Arnhem, and beyond to a place called Harderwijk. actually, and by the time it gets to 22nd of September, so many things are starting to or have started to go wrong. And of course, what significantly happens is that in the sector of the 1st Airborne Division, the Germans launch a very heavy counterattack, cutting the road, which is by then already coined by the Americans Hell's Highway, cutting the road just north of Wegel and south of Uden, and that would lead to a road cut that would last for almost 2 days.
Yeah,
Now, the context in which this happens is very significant because we have to remember that British Third Corps. Oh, here we go.
Okay, so this is the 23rd, unfortunately, but I just want to orient everybody. Here's Veckel, here's Uden. This is the corridor in which we're talking about from here all the way up.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Sorry about that. Just wanted to orient everybody with a map because everybody likes pictures.
Absolutely, great. So,
sorry to interrupt.
No worries. But the context in which this all takes place, we talked a little bit about the experience of Easy Company, but if you look at the broader picture, then what happens is that, when British 30 Corps arrives in Nijmegen, the 82nd Airborne Division hasn't been able to capture the bridges at Nijmegen. Now, there's different theories and opinions on what happened and should it have who to blame for that, this, that, and the other. Not important for now. The fact of the matter was that the Brits and the Americans need to cooperate on the 19th of September to get across the wild bridges at Nijmegen, the largest river in the Netherlands. That ultimately leads to the wild crossing by the 504 on the 20th of September, carried out during daylight because there was a radio message on the evening of the 19th that picked up from the bridge at Arnhem, where only 740 of the British airborne troops managed to get to, out of a little over 10,000 troops, just 740 of them, and they were hanging on by their fingernails. And the radio message makes clear that they can't hold out for more than 24 hours. So in that desperation, they launch that wild crossing. But as they get across, finally by the end of the day, it's actually already too late. When the first British tanks get across the wild bridge at Nijmegen, the German tanks already start rolling across the bridge at Arnhem. So it was actually too low. But there are still a lot of British just outside Arnhem in a place called Oosterbeek, a little bit 5 kilometers west of Arnhem, which becomes the famous perimeter in Oosterbeek, where the remnants of the British airborne troops, gather, so to speak, or move to and start defending themselves in a perimeter of about 900 yards wide and a mile deep, at least at the beginning. And at the end, it's much smaller.
Starts to constrict, yeah.
Everybody knows that they need to get to that place called Oosterbeek to link up with those remnants of the British airborne forces before they annihilate as well. So there's a lot of pressure to start going. Now the Germans set up blocking positions in just across the river at Nijmegen on what would the British and Americans commonly know the island, and basically bottle up those British and American forces that came across that river. So in all that in all that pressure, there are still also some German counterattacks around the perimeter of the 82nd Airborne Division, which have to be fended off. And in all this mix, of course, expenditure of ammunition, to name one thing, is pretty high.
Yeah.
So they need a constant flow of ammunition and reinforcements, for that matter, going north. So when the Germans again cut Hell's Highway, the first time was in the morning of the 20th of September when Easy Company was attacking Nuenen. The ammunition, the levels of ammunition was already at Nijmegen or up Nijmegen for the British and American force pretty low. So with the Germans already then on the 22nd starting to attack Wegel and cutting the Hell's Highway, that was a massive problem.
Yeah, they're the logistics tail. And for the folks that are not familiar with the terrain in Netherlands, especially up the corridor, that was that, as Edwin said, is named Hell's Highway. There's very little maneuver room on the flanks of that route for British forces advancing up there, and American forces as well as they move up. So they're kind of road bound, and so that's what makes holding that road open so critical. And as we talked about, you know, the German defenses to that point, before we went on air, we BS'd for a little bit, and we talked about how the Germans started to really coalesce around that Weckel to Uden corridor. And really it all comes to a head. You've got multiple Kampf groups in the area. You've got elements of the 6th Fallschirmjäger in the area, and they all, over the course of the 22nd and the 23rd, there's a series of attacks along this very small area, and the Germans end up being able to hold this area for 36 hours. But we'll talk a little bit of those attacks, and it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't start right against the roadway, right? They've got to advance in. And I remember reading in It Never Snows in September that one of the German tank commanders was talking about the early morning mist and how it hung above the ground. And with that, the German infantry and their tank support could advance up quite far and still be concealed by that early morning mist, which allowed them to get close to the highway.
Yeah. Yeah, and what also is very significant, of course, is that to realize two things. In that part of the Netherlands where the 101st Airborne Division operates, tanks actually cannot get off the road unless the fields are completely soggy, completely wet and muddy and whatnot. So, but in September, that would have been not much of a problem. What is the main problem, of course, is that if you would start advancing and get your logistical tail northwards, you need roads. Now, this is where the problem starts, because there were very few, back in the day, very few north-south roads in that area, especially hard surfaced roads. So in order to advance an entire army corps, which is 20,000 vehicles, 150,000 people, in a column with, if you look at the parameters that you used for movement, which is no movement during the night because you're going through enemy territory, technically. So anywhere between 6 a.m. and 7 p.m. you would drive. The number of vehicles to the mile, so spacing, and the average speed that they had in the columns, and etc. All these type of parameters. It would take British 30 Corps to pass any single point, let's say, on that road, no less than 6.7 days. So the column is massively long. Right, everybody's trying to get up there,
and you have different vehicle types with different max speeds as well.
Yeah,
so it's not like
that complicates things massively.
You've got
and
this
then, of course, you've
big
got the
accordion
crowd.
Yep, you've got this big accordion effect that happens during long columns like that, because something will stop the front of the column, then they'll push through it, so they'll race ahead when it's open, and it's just this accordion effect that happens with the vehicles in it. So it's not an easy road march by any stretch of the imagination. And you've got drivers who have been going now by the 22nd, probably several days with very little sleep, so they're not as sharp as they want to be. And like you said, and you have enemy on your flanks. So
and that enemy can get to your flanks also because there are two other corps that come up and attack, basically protecting the flanks of British 30 Corps. But those corps, for several reasons, which lead a little bit too far to go into now, but for several reasons, these corps start attacking a day or 1.5 days after 30 Corps started attacking. There are good reasons for that. Again, you could debate, should have pushed Market Garden back because of that or not. That's a different matter. But what of course happens then is that as the 30 Corps surges forward, trying to link up with the airborne divisions, the Germans of course want to seal off that breaking into their lines as much as possible. So that means that by the time the flanking corps start attacking, the Germans basically are ready for them. and they can't really stop them, but they can slow them down massively. And that allows, other German troops like the 107 Panzer Brigade, like Kampfer Walter, like von der Heydte, who actually came in, I think, on the 23rd, but
Yep. Yeah, he
but
does.
but also but also other units, 59th Infantry Division elements, to get to the highway without bumping into those flanking corps that were supposed to protect them. And
Yeah.
that's the main problem that they have. Just one good road leading up north for 30 Corps instead of several parallel roads that you could use, and the fact that the flanking corps were still way down south.
Yeah, this is not to say too, as we go through this, the Germans are not operating at a high level of efficiency though, right? They're pretty much a mess as well. But the thing is that their target is a singular target. It's a road, right? The vehicles on it are part of that target, but really all they have to do is cut the road at
Mm-hmm.
this point. But in going back to the 6th Fallschirmjäger, that unit was gutted in Normandy. And
Yeah.
von der Heydte talks about the level of competence, not to mention one of his battalions was swapped out with a lesser experienced, if you can imagine that, battalion.
Mhm.
And so and not only that, he's lacking radios across his formation. So coordination and command and control is very stunted for his unit.
Mhm.
Not to mention they're marching for a couple of days into the attack, so they're already tired. There's
Mhm.
already, again, that slinky, that accordion effect happening with his own troops, and
Mhm.
his attack kicks off
Yeah.
in spurts, which doesn't
Yeah.
allow him to mass his combat power. So the
Yeah.
Germans are not operating at a high level of efficiency here either. And again, there are conf groups involved, and I think historians in the past have given the German use of conf groups a little too much credit.
Mhm. Yeah.
They're ad hoc units for a reason,
Mhm.
because most of the time their parent units have been obliterated and they're just being pulled together into these other units.
Mhm.
Now, there are certain cases where that's not correct, where they are actually formed for a purpose, formed for a purpose rather than a hasty defense or a hasty attack.
Mhm.
But in this case, these are kind of grouped together
Oh yeah, and you can see that because
out of smashed units.
for instance, Walter was the commander, which is first at the start of Market Garden. He's south of Eindhoven, and he's in his unit, which is consisting of different subunits of different origin. So he's basically a camp group of them. And he's the one that is being hit on the 17th of September by the breakout of 30 Corps. He's right in their path. Now he then pulls out, is pushed out a little bit north and east, and he turns up at Veghel at Black Friday, but then being reinforced by the 107 Panzer Brigade, and even then, on the 22nd, there is a SS unit. I think it was Richter, or was it Heinke? Either or, can't remember for sure which one it was.
I
But
think it
they
was Richter. I think it was Richter.
Yeah, I think it was Richter, and he's still way south because he's being pushed back
Yep.
in the southeasterly direction of all. So everybody goes north, but he's pushed back southeasterly direction by one of the by the British Corps that it's operating on the right hand flank. If that makes sense.
Hmm.
But they are in the process of being released by another unit so that they can move up and reinforce that come from Peralta. But they also will not be in until the 23rd. So as the battle is progressing, that's what I'm trying to say. You see that as the battle is progressing, the Germans are constantly changing and tweaking these
Yep.
battle groups.
Yeah. But the key thing to understand about this is they're setting up a pincer essentially. They're
Yes.
coming in from the east and the west.
Yeah.
Now for the Allies, what units do we have in that area on the morning of the 22nd?
So not many. Well, if you really focus specifically on Veghel, right, which was actually one of the main targets, if not the main target of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, because of the 4 bridges in Veghel, 2 across the canal, and 2 across a small river. I think you Americans would call it a creek, probably.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in both cases, 1 railway bridge and 1 road bridge. And that's what the 501st needs to capture in that area.
Yeah.
By the
So
time, however, sorry.
there, and then the 501st is pushing up from what, Schindel?
Yeah, so what actually happens is that because of the German counterattacks on vehicle in the previous days, they've already launched a what they called a cannon move or maneuver on a German unit north of vehicle, which was so highly successful. And that was just the first battalion of the 501
Hmm.
that um, uh, who was the commander again? Colonel Johnson? Yeah, Johnson.
Yeah. Jumpy
Um,
Johnson.
he gets a little bit. He gets a bright idea, and he said, "Well, we pulled this off. It's just our first battalion. Why don't we make a bigger cannon move and push the Germans out of the area in the triangle, vehicle, Sint-Oeder Road, Schindel?" Because there
Hmm.
were a lot of Germans in Schindel. Actually, in Dutch, you pronounce it Schijndel, but let's call it Schindel because I think that would be more likely for English people speaking world to say. And so technically, what he does, he sends two battalions in the night of the 21st and the 22nd. They go basically northwest and west, getting into that place called Schindel to set up a blocking position.
Yep.
And then the other idea was to send up a elements of the 502nd Parachute Infantry, which is south of Schindel, in a place called St. Oeder Road, and they have to push north and basically annihilate. And the idea, of course, is to crush the Germans. By using the 502, pushing the Germans
Yep.
back to the 501,
A
and then
hammer and anvil.
and a hammer and anvil movement actually, and that's the grand idea that they have, and that's all on the western part of Hales Highway, so to
Hmm.
speak. Of course, the Germans have their own plans because they want to do that pincer movement, and what they are targeting is actually the bridges at Veghel. A couple of days before, the big target was the bridge at Zon. That's also the 107 Panzer Brigade that attacks in that area, and why Easy Company gets to Noonan,
Yep.
and
On
which
the
also
19th. Yeah.
and
Yep.
which also ties into the fighting at Zonza Forest and Best, because that's also actually a huge pinch movement, but then focused on the canal at Zon, and now basically the Germans move up north a little bit and try to counterattack there. But it's interesting that the Germans always choose a canal, and I think they do that because a canal can be a huge choke point, of course.
Yeah.
You just
Yeah.
need to get the
You
bridges.
can bottle up the enemy around it if they don't have adequate bridging. Plus,
Yeah.
it's only a very narrow area they can go across it. So
And if you can destroy those bridges and can dig in at the far end of the canal,
you can
you
bottle them up and knock them out piecemeal. Yep.
yeah, everything north of there is basically blocked and cut off. So the Germans are trying to get in. So as it happens, on the night of the 21st, on the 22nd, as the first battalion moves towards Schindel during the night, the other battalion that was coming in, I think it was third battalion, it came in from Eerde. It would come in later that night, almost close in the morning. And but as the first battalion cuts through the area on the night march, um, a German Kampfgruppe, Huber,
Uba. Yep.
basically marches right behind them, going in a north-south direction towards Eerde and the bridge. And it's almost too crazy to contemplate what's happening here. It's almost like this is a bad Hollywood script. You've got just think about it. You've got one American battalion moving east-west technically. Then the Germans are moving north-south behind them, but they have to go through that place called Eerde where another American battalion is. But before they get there, or they're not even completely there when that American battalion moves out in northwesterly direction to join the other one, technically handing over. And I'm simplifying things here a little
Yeah.
bit. Technically handing over that place of Eerde, which has a huge church tower there, which completely commands the entire area, which is technically flat as pancake. I reckon you've been there,
Yeah. Yep.
and you can see all the traffic going down Hell's Highway. So you're just handing over a very small underscript village, which actually has strategic value,
Yeah.
and it's just you couldn't make this up as a scriptwriter, I think, even for a bad B film, and yet it's happening.
Yeah, and it becomes a real slugfest,
Oh
and
yeah.
Huber is his comp group is basically almost annihilated, isn't it?
Yes, because of course what happens in the grand scheme of things is that as this is all happening, so the 501 element, so because we were talking about what's actually in the area, so we got two battalions of the 501 who are actually moving away from Veghel. And there's just one battalion left in Veghel. That's the second battalion. They just around there, guarding Veghel. And of course, regimental headquarters is there. That's about it. Um, and they are being attacked initially on during that time. But what also happens around that same time that on the 21st, the first elements of a British division called the 15th Scottish Division
Yep.
enter Eindhoven and are in the process of relieving the 506, taking over
Yep.
the area of Eindhoven. And another area that also releases elements of the 327 Glider Infantry Regiment north of Eindhoven. So as these elements are being released, the 506 is actually in the process of, in the morning of the 22nd, to move north and then come through Veghel and then go to that place what you showed on the map to Uden,
Uden.
because that was basically outside the divisional area, the
Yeah,
divisional sector.
and just to remind everybody, the airborne divisions don't have a lot of organic vehicle
No,
capability. Smattering of jeeps here and there, mostly just to for command and control, resupply medical, and to haul their anti-tank guns from the AT battalion. So they don't have a lot of vehicles. So
no,
what happens is they use captured vehicles, whatever they can borrow from 30 Corps to move elements up north. So they go piecemeal.
yeah.
And
Oh, they even employ public transport buses.
yeah, so
Having the paratroopers just sitting and then a machine gun team on the roof. They have pictures of it. I
yeah,
don't
I
know
was
if
going to
you ever
say there's
saw
a
them.
very well-known
They're
picture of that.
hilarious. They're hilarious. But
But
they are basically lying on top of that on top of that bus to give.
bus, yeah.
I wouldn't want to be one of those machine gunners. If that bus driver,
What
goes
happens if
around
the
that.
bus gets hit? You're flying. You're
Oh,
going somewhere.
absolutely. Yeah,
But
it's
they have to piecemeal their way up there. So for
yeah,
those of you who've read Band of Brothers and have read all the material about it, you'll know that Captain Winters, a slice of the company headquarters and part of the first platoon end up in Uden, but the rest of the company is cut off
yeah.
as the Germans attack and break the high. Well, they're not cut. They don't get cut off. They're cut off because they don't have vehicle transport right away. So the
Mhm.
rest of the unit cannot move up yet. But then the Germans begin their attack
Yeah,
and
yeah.
from the
And
east.
from the east, and the initial attack hits elements of the 501. I think it was Dog Company of the 501, because initially the Germans come straight from the east from a place called ERP, down the main road. But I would argue almost by the skin of their teeth, Dog Company holds the line there. And the Germans then try to move a little bit north and basically cut the road between Veghel and Veghel and Uden, sorry,
Yeah, I think one of the German commanders comments.
command Hell's Highway.
Yeah, I think one of the German commander actually comments, or he was an infantry unit commander, so like a lieutenant,
Mhm.
comments that the incoming fire is almost entirely small arms.
Yeah.
He's like, we don't receive any artillery fire. There's no heavy mortars. There's no tank fire. It's almost always when they're facing the Americans, small arms fire, the paratroopers. It's almost always small arms fire.
Yeah.
So that should tell you right now the weakness of a paratrooper unit in terms of organic weaponry.
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
The Germans are well aware of it, and there's a number of occasions where paratrooper platoons, like you said, hold on by the skin of their teeth.
Hmm. Yeah. And what happens is here also, and then we have to get back technically to the 19th of September. And one of the misconceptions, of Markegan, one of the huge misconceptions, there are several, but one of the huge misconceptions is that the British come in over the course of 3 days. And if you study market garden, of course, and I know you did as well, Joe, that you quickly realize that everybody's in the same boat. So that means that every airborne division needs to make decisions what to bring in on day 1, day 2, and day 3. And General Taylor makes a very interesting decision here, because he thinks, I'll bring in all my paratrooper units, by paratroop regiments in, and some highly needed gliders for division and the airborne medical advanced team actually. And then on day 2, I bring in the glider infantry plus regimental jeeps and this, that, and the other. That also tells you that for day 1 is technically it's walking for everybody.
Yeah.
And then only on day 3 he brings in his glider and parachute field artillery, everything by glider. So the first 2 days, the American Airborne, the first Airborne at least, is completely void of artillery cover.
Yep.
Now the reason why Taylor does that, I've read somewhere. I've never been able to verify it though, but it is an interesting idea. Is that Taylor actually hopes, cross your fingers here.
Hope is not a strategy.
No, yeah, I know that. Go tell General Taylor, I'd say. But he hopes that the British could lend him some artillery support if he needed it. Of course, there's during the planning phase and the phase of preparation, there's little to no real liaison between the airborne in England and British vertical in Belgium. And of course, the Brits need all their artillery themselves.
Yeah, they're in the attack.
Yeah.
And do you
then
think,
happens,
theoretically, do you think Taylor's decision was influenced on what happened to the 377th in Normandy?
I don't know. That's an interesting question, but
So the 377th Parachute Field Artillery Battalion dropped all of its gun teams, and I think they were only able to assemble 1 or 2 guns out of 12.
Yeah.
I don't know if that that might have figured into his calculations on what to bring, but still, it doesn't make any sense.
It is a logical assumption.
Yeah.
It is interesting that the only unit that dropped parachute field artillery by parachute is a part of one of the field artillery units of the 82nd Airborne Division, and that was their first during the Second World War.
And they're critical, though. They're critical. That unit ends up playing a critical role up there on the heights. Yeah.
But coming back to that field artillery, in theory, on the 3rd day, on the 19th, the 101st Airborne Division should have received its artillery. But there's a couple of things going on the 19th which completely muck up the entire glider serial there. First of all, is very bad weather in England, and especially over the English Channel. So quite a few of those gliders have to abort, and quite a few also ditch in the English Channel.
Yep.
And of course, if you ditch, you lose all the stuff that's on there. And as they are coming over enemy territory, quite a few of those gliders were shot down.
Yep.
And just off the top of my head, because I don't have the statistics at hand here, but just off the top of my head, I thought it was 385 gliders that were dispatched, not exclusively, but mostly with field artillery. And I think about 209 made it.
I don't know. I don't have the numbers on.
But it's quite a low number.
Quite a few. Yeah, that's a large portion.
Yeah, and specifically the heavy artillery that they have, the glider field artillery, which I think they did have 105s, the glider field artillery. They have to.
Thought they were 75 millimeter pack howitzers. No.
Yeah, that's the parachute field artillery.
Yeah.
The glider field artillery was a bit heavier.
Heavier, right?
But
and then of course you have the 81st, who also has their 57 millimeters.
They come in on day 3 as well. So so what actually happens then is that, and part of the glider field artillery comes in on the 23rd, but it's a day after the day that we are discussing now.
Yeah.
Because a large part of them had to abort and were able to land in England, so they could be repurposed and sent across on the 23rd. But what it means on the 22nd is that even though you have organic artillery, there's hardly anything in theater.
Yeah.
So you're still confronted with that problem that you are, the heaviest thing that they could shoot at German probably was an 81 millimeter mortar.
Yep. At the battalion level. Yep.
And the Germans coming charging at you with Panther tanks.
Yep. Luckily, they did have elements of the 44th Royal Tank Regiment with them. What, A and B Squadron, I think, was there at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Predominantly A and B Squadron, C Squadron was more in the area of St. Huda Road at that point.
Yeah, and they provide some critical support too.
Yeah, yeah. And with them also there's the 1519 Hussars, which is still
That's
in the
right.
area.
Yeah.
And they have also a reconnaissance unit attached to them. They're generally referred to as the Royals.
Yeah. The Royals, do they push out to the east?
They push out the east on the Wilhelmina Canal, or
Yep.
the Zuid-Willemsvaart, sorry, the Zuid-Willemsvaart.
Right. Yep.
And they actually at one point engage some Germans that try to get across a bridge or near a bridge, a little bit, let's say, east of Veghel.
Yeah, I remember reading an account of one of the scout cars spotting a panther, and at the same time the panther spots it, and it basically they throw it in reverse, and they haul back down the road.
You better.
They don't have a lot of armor, so it's not like
No.
they can withstand a
No,
shell from a panther.
But they're reconnaissance guys. They're not there to technically. They're not there
No.
to fight, are they?
No, they did exactly what they were supposed to do: go out and find the enemy, and then get out
Yeah.
of there.
And then get the hell out of there.
Yeah, but so now the German attack is on the morning of the 22nd kicks off, and it's by the midday it's fully involved. It's a ferocious attack.
It's an incredibly heavy attack, and what also happens is that the Germans actually launched 2 attacks that day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. And in the morning, actually, one of the tanks, if you look at a map of Veghel, they actually get right to the outskirts, almost to the outskirts of Veghel, where by pure chance, just an elements of the 81st AT battalion under command of Lieutenant Colonel Cox just pushed it.
Yep.
So they had some anti-tank capability in that area, but not too much, I think. And there is this story that somewhere in Veghel there is this 57 millimeter anti-tank gun, but the crew's gone. And Lieutenant Colonel Cox, who's actually the battalion commander, sees that and really immediately gets it into action, asking a couple of guys to help him out.
Yeah, the rumor was one of them was a battery commander.
Yeah, I think. But the most interesting fella that actually it's part of that action is a glider pilot who a couple of days before flew into Nijmegen, Tom Barry. And this guy, he stayed in Nijmegen for a couple of days, because the orders for the glider pilots were very simple: hitch a ride back to Brussels somehow. So he finally hitches a ride a day before Black Friday, spends the night in Veghel, and he happens just to be in the area. And as Cox is trying to organize all of this, and he says, "Do you guys need any help?" So answer, of course, is yeah. so
it's all yours. Have fun.
He finds himself out there with an anti-tank gun, with the battalion commander and some other guy there. Probably this Tom Barry character had no clue what he's doing, of course, because he's trained to fly a glider. That's it. Yeah. And probably the heaviest weapon he ever probably fired is probably a carabine.
Yeah, for everybody watching, doctrinally, the British glider pilots in the glider regiment versus the glider crews from the U.S. Completely different in terms of doctrine and training. The glider pilots for the British glider regiment were meant to fight on after landing, whereas the American ones were to withdraw and be brought back to airfield so they can continue flying. Yeah. Generally, they were used to escort prisoners and things of that nature. They were not meant to be frontline fighters after they landed. So doctrinally is a big difference between what you see the glider units up around Arnhem doing versus what you see the U.S. glider elements doing down south.
Yeah, and that's a whole specific can of worms that we opened up here.
No, we're not opening that can of worms.
This ties into service politics.
Yeah,
and especially the push by the U.S. Army Air Force to become an independent service. And very simply put, if you allow as US Army Air Force for your pilots to be trained for ground as for an infantry role, and you at the same time trying to become an independent service, you're actually doing two completely opposite things. That's you're not giving out the right signal.
No, not at
So
all.
I'm never really studied this, but I do think that must have something to do with it. And the Americans
It's
later,
logical.
actually later, one of the lessons learned of Market Garden is actually that, the way the British do, and they call that concept total soldier.
Mhm.
And there is some debate after Market Garden. And Gavin is very heavily involved in that debate, actually, the commanding officer of the 82nd Airborne Division. And he actually is a proponent of, giving all these glider pilots an infantry training, because all of a sudden you've got 3,000 extra infantrymen.
Yeah, and if they don't know what
Uh,
they're doing, they become more of a hazard than anything,
Oh
or a
yeah, they become a
hindrance.
liability, and
Yeah,
so you can turn that, let's say that hazard or that liability, you can turn that into a true strength.
yeah.
But of course,
So
he got pushback from the U.S. Army Air Force, and in the end, they struck a compromise in that glider pilots could volunteer to become trained, and actually they trained quite a few, and they did some very amazing stuff in Operation
I
Varsity.
was going to
Some
say,
people,
varsity, they perform very well,
and they
defending
performed
the landing
incredibly
zones.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
A lot of credit to them.
yeah,
But to
yeah,
bring us back around, now we have this counterattack coming.
yeah.
Um, you have elements of the 506 that get pushed up, and then later on in the is it the evening of the 22nd, we start to see the 3rd Battalion of the 327th be pushed into the battle as well.
Yeah, yeah. But before we go there, because as this tank attack is going on, and I really want to bring this in because it involves somebody from Easy Company, and as this attack is going on, it's on the outskirts, literally on the old outskirts. Nowadays it's residential area, but in the old outskirts of Veghel, and just before this is going on with that anti-tank gun, and when Fox Company of the 506 is pulling into that area as well,
Hmm.
and they set up set up they are giving orders to counterattack actually, and one of the former Easy Company members, of course, with them, that's Lieutenant Smith.
Yep, Ray
And
Schmitz.
he's
Yep,
right in an action, and I just, if you allow me, I just got here this book here, Fighting Fox Company.
yep. Very good book.
Very good book,
Friend of
very
the show,
interesting.
Terry Poiser.
Yeah, yeah, very. Always very pleased with that book, and because it gives you so much wider perspective what's happening. I'm still hoping that somebody will ever do a book on Dog Company as well, so you get the entire, or maybe even the entire battalion. But hey, who knows? Um, so, and just to give the viewers or the listeners a little bit of an idea of how intense that fighting was at Veghel, if you just allow me to read aloud a testimony by one of the Fox Company guys called Herbert Aggie.
Yeah.
And he writes as follows. I said, I was very tense, but I had little fear. In fact, though tense, I had a deep inner calm. I recall feeling well. I had not then had enough combat experience to feel much fear. Lucky him. I did not know what violent, close combat would accomplish in the way of destruction of human life. I was soon to know. We moved fast. We moved towards the open highway, hugging close to the houses that lined the road leading to the edge of town. When we came to the last house and paused for a moment, I saw a ditch running by the highway side commenced about 25 feet from where we stood. I gave the order, and three of us ran at a low crouch for the ditch and jumped in. Still crouching, I proceeded up the ditch, and others followed closely. I'd gone but a few feet, but when machine gun bullets began crackling over my head. At the same time, I came to the end of the part of the ditch, which was crossed by a dirt road leading to a field to the right. I saw that I had to open this open and unprotected spot to get where the ditch began. I hesitated. Machine gun bullets were crackling right over the spot. I did not want to cross that piece of ground just then. I looked behind me. The ditch was beginning to fill up as more and more men of the platoon jumped in. So it's getting pretty crowded over there, which is a hazard in itself.
Yeah.
I knew that I had to get out and move ahead. There was no way to stop the men from coming in. I knew that we could not crowd up. It would be murder if a mortar shell landed in amongst us. Then I saw Lieutenant Schmitz come into the ditch. I yelled to him to hold the man up a minute until we could get across. I remember Lieutenant Schmidt's face as he moved up to where I was. It was white, tense, and grim. I jumped out of the ditch and swiftly ran to the right to a hedgerow into which I flung myself. I began to crawl quickly to a right-hand flank position with 2 other men. After going several yards, I peered out into the open field to my front. And then it goes on a little bit, and then where was it? And then it says that with these guys in a ditch, right? So that's the thing. A lot of guys are still in the ditch, but next to the ditch, that apparently also was a British truck, and and what it says here then, around from the advancing German tank, which starts coming towards them, struck a British truck stopped on the roadway above the troopers. It was full of ammunition, and the impact caused a huge and deafening explosion. Those in the ditch below tried to move back from the burning truck and stay low in the ditch to avoid enemy gunfire. But 2 men were not moving in the ditch, Lieutenant Smith and Pine.
Yep.
And that was sadly the end of Lieutenant Smith, who was, as some people may know who listen to your podcast, a very good friend of Dick Winters.
Yeah. Hold on 1 second. I apologize for the video, folks. It got really dark here. We're expected some storms, and I'm in the front room of my house. I'm going to turn on a light real quick. I'll be right back. Apologies for that. Yeah. Those of the folks that are watching and listening, they're fans of Band of Brothers, you'll recall in the marshalling areas before D-Day, Schmidt decided to challenge Winters to a wrestling match, and Winters flipped him over his shoulder and broke a couple of vertebrae in Schmitz's back, and he missed the mission. Once they got back, he was reassigned to Fox Company, and then he later is killed fighting on Hell's Highway.
Yeah.
So brilliant passage there to add into it. And Fox, like you said, they were ordered to counterattack, and it was really, they were, if memory serves, they holding of like the if you're looking east, the left portion of the line in the battalion, or were they more to the?
Well, they were actually they were moving along Hell's Highway, pushing out of town. And later that night, as the Germans pulled back from that area a little bit, they actually moved forward. So what you see on the 23rd, early on the morning of the 23rd, they're a couple of 100 yards further north or northeast, to be exact. And then I counterattacked again on the 23rd and have to fall back quite a few 100 yards. And there's this other guy, I forgot his name, who actually got some kind of what medal did he get? DSC, I think he got.
Oh, Lev.
Lev, yeah. So, but that happens on the 23rd as he covers, and also, of course, then we would be talking about the 23rd. But if you look at that type of action around Vehicle, it's incredibly intense, and there are some really interesting and stunning actions even by different American paratroopers from different regiments there. I say paratroopers, I should say airborne, because the 327 glider, as you already mentioned, are also in the area.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to do some reading, because there's some really amazing stories that come out here. Some great courage and shown by a lot of these troopers in these very small unit actions that you probably never really hear about. Interesting, when you were reading the passage, and you looked up and you were talking about guys filling up in the ditch, and before we went on air, we talked about what could happen and you have a group of people together. Do you want to briefly visit that before we wind up the day, the Friday?
Yeah, because so we talked a lot about easy company, and it is, we could fill a whole day, I reckon, with the 22nd of September, because there's so much stuff going on there. But let's go back to the 502 here. and and they are still on while all this is going on around Veghel, of course, and Comfortable Huber is trying in the afternoon, trying to attack Veghel for the opposite direction, getting close. We really have to point that out as well, because it's an important important thing. They actually get close to the bridge on Hell's Highway across the Zuid-Willemsvaart, but there are elements of Americans around that bridge already, and those are just elements, part of the 506, part of airborne engineers in the area, but also 327, one battalion of the 327 glider is coming in. And actually what happens is that part of that Comfortable Huber gets squeezed in that mix.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why Comfortable Huber is basically overrun and completely annihilated, and just very few people can go back. One of the groups actually in that area is actually Dog Company. If you read the accounts, a lot of people think that Dog Company actually was in Veghel with Easy and with EV minus and with Fox Company. They're actually still south of the Zuid-Willemsvaart and helping out there in pushing, counterattacking some other Germans coming also from the Eerde area.
Yep.
And while all this is going on there, the 502 is still planning to attack north of St. Udo, probably now not to link up with the 501 at Schindel, because that is moving back to Veghel as well, because of all the fighting there. They leave Schindel for what it is actually, but the 502 wants to move up a little bit, and then what happens is that a lot of high-ranking officers are around there, and what it says, and this is actually a quote from the book Rendezvous with Destiny, another great book if you want to read about the 101st Airborne Division, especially if you just get into that history for the first time. It's a great book still to read. It says here that Colonel Michaelis, who's the regimental commander of the 502, early in the day moved his CP forward to be near the action, and located it in a ditch traversing the field to the right of the road. He was there with members of his staff, demanding changes in the supporting artillery fire when a tree burst exploded above the entire group, dousing the whole area with steel fragments. Colonel Michaelis was wounded in the arm, leg, and stomach. Private First Class Garland E. Mills, his orderly, was killed. His S2, his intelligence officer, Captain George Bucher, and his S3, Captain R.B. Clemens, along with Captain Henry Plitt, the assistant S3, the assistant operation officer, were wounded. Also down were Lieutenant Colonel Dennehy, the divisional intelligence officer, the G2, and Lieutenant Colonel Hanna, the divisional operations officer, the G3, who had been visiting the CP. Apart from them, Major Elkins, the commanding officer of the 377 Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, and Lieutenant Thomas Swarinski, one of his forward observers, were also both hit, though Major Elkins' wound was light and he continued to run his battalion throughout the day. 14 men in total became casualties.
Yeah, and we
But
talked
not
about
just
this.
any 14 men. That's the point.
We talked about the significance of these particular men being hit all at one time before we went on air. And really, you asked my opinion as somebody who's served in the military for a good long time. When you have essentially what is a leadership decapitation like that, there is going to be a level of paralysis that affects the unit right away, because especially as you said, not only was the S3 hit, but the S3 Alpha, the assistant. So he would be next in line logically to take over as the S3. So even then, your chain of command is interrupted further. But I mean, the amount of damage done to that particular regiment and also the division with one shell. I mean, you can tell how you can understand how it would cause a hiccuping of, like I said, a paralysis of action, because they have to reconstitute the headquarters, right? The orderly was killed, the CO was wounded, all these men were all hit at once, and there's a logical progression and we talked about, but that has to happen and it takes time. Some units that practice it, it will go faster. Some units that don't, it will be slower and more painful. But in this case, just to point that out, when we talked about what if all those men had been hit in that ditch? Well, yeah, that's a rifle, part of a rifle platoon. And not to say that it, you know, each one of these individual people is a human being and their loss is terrible. But a rifle squad is easier to replace in terms of levels of expertise and the command and control of a unit than having almost an entire headquarters wiped out.
Well, you lost your regimental commander, the regimental intelligence officer, and
the three alpha,
regimental operations officer, and his assistant.
Yeah.
You know, already
plus the divisional 2 and 3. I mean,
yes. So you got severe damage and what you call paralysis on the regimental level, but then also you got the same thing practically happening at least with the G2 and G3 at divisional level, and of course with the guys we talked about, got the always get their names confused. Hannah and Dennehy. You know, as far as I know, but you know, I don't know what your opinion on this. I think they were very capable officers, very capable staff officers.
Yeah, especially Hannah, especially Hank Hannah, who had come from the 506th. And for folks who have read about the 506 during the Normandy campaign, if you've read about Colonel Sink's wild ride, Hannah was in the Jeep with him when that happened.
Okay.
So Hank Hannah was a very, very capable. That's why he got picked to become the divisional G3.
Yeah.
Because
which is a lot of responsibility.
Yeah.
And you know, so you got quite talented officers also taken out. And if you look, and if we then zoom down into the 502, of course, you know what you see that it's well, they already lost a battalion commander a couple of days before.
Yep.
And a very highly talented one at that one. So it's not the first blow. And if you read that book Rendezvous with Destiny by Rapport and Norwood, they actually say also this is the severest single blow the division had during the Second World War.
Yeah, that makes sense considering the caliber of individuals that were hit.
Yeah,
McCallus is an excellent officer as well. So I mean, to have all those go down in one time.
Yeah.
But to bring everything back around, because we've been going for about an hour, and I know it's late by you, and you've been touring all day, and I want to get you off the X as quick as possible. What you have now, because of all those counterattacks, and despite the spirited defense on the part of the 101st and the British units that are in the area, the Germans still cut the highway for 36 hours. And like Edwin was saying when we first came on, that supply train needs to keep running, because ammunition doesn't replace itself, especially artillery ammunition, because doctrinally the U.S. Army and the British Army had decided that they would expend steel instead of blood as much as possible. So artillery ammunition becomes very, very important for the rest of the war, essentially for both armies. So without those supplies running up Hell's Highway, with that hiccup for 36 hours, it impedes operations up north.
Yeah, and you can really you can easily assess how much impact it must have been and how critical it was. Because late in the afternoon of the 22nd, the British decide to have their 32nd Guards Armored Brigade, which is part armored infantry and part tanks, of course, and send them back down Hell's Highway to help open up Hell's Highway again. Yep. But by the time they get into the area, it's already 7 o'clock in the evening, so it gets dark. So you know, no use of setting up a attack then. So
yeah, and unlike now, there's no night vision in those vehicles.
So they basically hole up in Uden for the night, and on the 23rd, of course, they start operations again to help to open up the Hell's Highway. But before they can do that, the Germans counterattack for the second time on the 23rd. So the 23rd is also a lot of fighting in that area. But the mere fact that the British feel compelled to send an entire armored brigade south again, while they're desperately trying to attack up north, it alone tells you about, you know, the importance of what
Importance
happened
of
to
it,
our vehicle that day, if
without a
nothing
doubt.
else.
Well, I got to tell you, pal, this has been fantastic. I think our discussion, despite the fact that we tried to keep it on track, was probably just as chaotic as the fight itself.
Yeah.
We touched on a lot of stuff. And thanks for obviously coming on and bringing your wealth of knowledge and talking about really we covered from the 17th all the way through to the 23rd when you think about it. But really, we spent the bulk of our time talking about Black Friday, which is obviously the crux of the problem. When you get to that point in time, really, and it reverberates further than just the localized actions in that area. But I want to thank you again for coming on. Tell everybody where we can find you, your company, when we're going to see you out again, maybe another appearance on another pod, or maybe I'll come back again.
Well, at current, I've got nothing planned on YouTube or podcast, but I'm always happy to jump on. So and especially with you, Joe, that would be grand. So just let me know. As far as touring is concerned, I'm doing a lot with the National Tattoo Museum at current, and then after that, I still have a couple of tours lined up, private tours.
And the name of your company for everyone?
And my company is called Battlefield Discovery.
I can tell you again, if you haven't figured out over the course of this podcast how knowledgeable Edwin is and how much fun it would be to tour those areas with him, you're sorely misunderstanding the individual that's sitting on the screen with me here.
Too kind.
I want to thank all of our listeners and viewers. You can find us on Patreon. We're not Lost Private Podcast. We're on Spotify and Amazon and YouTube and Apple Podcasts and any podcatcher out there. You can find us. I'll post some links for some of the books that Edwin and I talked about during the podcast. I'll have up the link for his company. So if you want to engage him about maybe going on a tour with him, I highly recommend it. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by. Thanks again, Edwin. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. It was absolutely an honor and great to do with you.